Wow, this is really happening again. This is the Friday SportsCage for Nelson Homes, supplying home packages and RTMs for over 65 years. Brendan McGuire and Colson Schultz on this edition of the program. Coming up on this Friday SportsCage, we will do our weekly check-ins with Farhan, Lalji, and Eric Francis from Sportsnet, and Dante De Caria of the Regina Pats will help us tee up tonight's game against the Edmonton Oil Kings. 7 o'clock. Puck drop from the Brandt Center. I know a really good crowd is going to be there. I'm going to be there. It's the first Pats game I've been to all year with a lot of my coworkers, and it's a really important game for the Pats entering the weekend with the 7 seed. Got to end up in the top 8 if they're going to get in, and they've got teams coming at them from behind. So really critical weekend for the Regina Pats in their hunt for the Western Hockey League playoffs. I guess we'll talk a bit about that hockey game earlier today and keep you up to date on what's happened with the Olympics. Our first guest joining us on the Western Pizza hotline was a longtime investigative reporter with the Toronto Star and has written one of my favorite CFL books, The Year of the Rocket, all about Rocket Ismail, and has embarked on a new YouTube channel project called Canadian Football Time Machine. Very pleased to welcome to the program Paul Woods from the great city of Toronto. And Paul, did you catch any of the hockey game? I just have to ask on a day like today.
Yeah, it was pretty tense. Nice ending, but man, it was not looking good till pretty late in that game.
Yeah, I was a little nervous halfway through that third period. And also the courts in the U.S. said, what's his name can't keep the tariffs on. So everything's coming up Canada today. This is just the day of the Maple Leaf. But
yeah, Gretzky even had some nice things to say for a change.
You know what? That's what, I wanted to ask you about that because when I read your book, The Year of the Rocket, which I would recommend for anybody who loves CFL books, it's one of my favorite books for sure. A lot of the swagger that those people had when they came into the Canadian Football League, and by those people, I'm talking about Bruce McNall, Wayne Gretzky, and John Candy, and they were saying a lot of things that were, I don't know what the word is, I know more than you do. And a lot of us, I think at the time, gave them that credibility because these were big shots coming in from Hollywood. And, some are complaining about how Wayne Gretzky doesn't seem all that worldly about world issues. And I feel like those signs were there when you look at the quotes from the early 90s in your book, that this is a guy who had great success. I'm not saying he's a terrible person or anything like that, but he's somebody who was really good at one thing and made lots of money and was around people with lots of influence. And sometimes you get caught up in a world thinking that you're a lot more worldly and intelligent than you really are.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, Wayne sort of got into owning the Argonauts just because he sort of went along with what Bruce McNall wanted him to do. He thought at that time Bruce had the Midas touch, and so he jumped on board. He soured on it pretty quickly. Within a year and a half of being part of the group, he wanted out. He wanted to be out of the CFL altogether.
Yeah, and it sounds like they hung around largely because John Candy loved the team and wanted to be around that, and that's a whole other discussion for another day. I wanted to talk to you about your YouTube channel that you've launched, the Canadian Football Time Machine, and we're living in an era when our attention spans have shrunk dramatically, and they are shrinking more all the time. And being a newspaper guy, you probably understand this better than anybody. And what I really like about this channel that you've launched, so many of the videos, a lot of them are TSN and other networks, are like 3 minutes long. And I feel like just rolling through those videos and scrolling through those videos, I've learned a lot about CFL history in a very short period of time.
Well, thank you for saying that, Brendan. I mean, it's been a lot of fun for me to start rolling them out, and this is going to go on for a while. Like I started recording stuff back in really started in '83, but I got really serious in 1986, and I really made a point of trying to document as best I could the ongoing history of the Canadian Football League through the way it was covered in the broadcast media, particularly in television. And so I've got literally thousands of clips. I mean, I'm now up to almost 400 on the channel. I only launched it about a couple of weeks ago. There's about 400 clips on there from 86, 87, 88, and we're now into 89. And there are thousands more coming. And I'm even remembering things that I'd forgotten about. I mean, I some of the things I knew pretty well, but I recorded some things that I'd forgotten. I'd forgotten about Willard Reeves being cut and going to the NFL and coming back, and a bunch of things like that. And as we go through the coming weeks and months and probably years before everything rolls out, I mean, there's a lot of really fascinating things about what happened in and around Canadian football. Hardcore fans will remember a lot of them, but they might want to see them for themselves. How it was portrayed in the media, what the principals involved were saying at the time. With things like expansion to the U.S. and things like different commissioners coming and going and so on and so forth. There's piles and piles of stuff to come in the coming weeks, months, and years. I think people that really are interested in the Canadian Football League are going to find this to be an ongoing treasure trove of stuff.
The NFL Network and the NFL in general, for a long time, and probably still today, has done a very good job of commercializing their history and telling their story. And as you and I both know, the CFL has a very deep history, maybe even deeper and richer than what the NFL has. But we don't have the same resources that the National Football League has to tell that story. Do you feel like you're kind of filling that niche that maybe things like the NFL Network have filled for NFL junkies over the years?
I never thought of it quite that way, but I think that does make sense in a way. I mean, honestly, the fact is, a lot of the clips, maybe the vast majority of the clips that I recorded, they only exist in one place, in my basement. I mean, the networks themselves erased and reused tapes all the time. They did not archive their own work. And so, a news conference about, say, the announcement of a new commissioner, Donald Crump, the oddly named Donald Crump, who took over for a couple of years. I'm just looking at some of that stuff today from 1990. There's no record of that in the archives of TSN. I don't think or maybe if there is, there's minimal. There's no record of it belonging to the Canadian Football League. They didn't keep anything. And so, if it wasn't for little old me using a VCR for all these years and taping this stuff and then digitizing it, we'd have the written record, although even that's disappearing as newspapers start to die out. And this is a vibrant league that's been around for decades and decades. The Argonauts have been playing football for more than 150 years. The Tiger Cats, the same thing, and other teams across the league have been around for a long, long time. And it's an important part of the fabric of Canada that deserves to be preserved. And that's what I'm trying to achieve. And if that ends up being sort of like NFL films in the sense that you can go there and you can see some cool stuff that happened 30 or 40 years ago, fantastic.
I know exactly what you're talking about, that the archive that we assume is always there, and a lot of times it's not. I do a weekly TV show during football season for a local cable station, and I just assumed, because it was the 40th anniversary a little while ago of the program, and I thought, great, we'll find the first episode, and realized pretty quickly, not that simple. And even the video that is there can be a lot of work just to hunt around and find. So I know exactly what you're talking about. So much of it is erased, and or if it's not erased, it's really hard to come up with. The reason why I think I enjoy the stories of the history is because it really explains to us why the league is what it is today and how it got here, and it also helps identify what the issues are. So, for example, entering the 1980s, those were the halcyon days of the Canadian Football League, when organizations wanted to sponsor, and they actually had a real TV contract at a time that a lot of other pro sports teams struggled to get a TV contract. And I believe it was Carling O'Keefe that did the contract for 81, 82, 83. And the ratings did really, really well. You get up to Grey Cup 83. They have this amazing Grey Cup. It looked like a great event in Vancouver, the first indoor Grey Cup. And it seemed like the sky was the limit for the Canadian Football League. And then they roll out another huge TV contract through Carling O'Keefe and CTV for 84, 85, 86. And then through those years, the ratings started to decline quite sharply. And by the end of 86, they couldn't get another TV contract. And it really explained how this league was looking like this dynamite sporting enterprise in 1983 to being on life support and on death's door by the end of the decade. To me, that's just wild how it changed so fast, but that really tells the story, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, you're bang on about all of that stuff. You know, the last deal that Jake Goddard, the then commissioner, signed was, I believe it was for $33 million for the 3 years, $11 million a year, which doesn't sound like much by today's standards, but compared to the revenue that was coming into the league from elsewhere, that was a lot of money. And then, as you said, the ratings went down, and by the end of 86, CTV, which had been one of the two broadcast partners that showed games, decided they weren't going to come back in 87. And so the league had to create its own TV network, the Canadian Football Network, and sell the airtime itself, buy time on independent stations. And really, that was the beginning of a really steep decline in the league's fortunes. Montreal Alouettes, of course, folded at the start of the 87 season. One of the very first piles of content that I put on Canadian Football Time Machine was coverage of the folding of the Alouettes. You know, the things that were like it was the lead item on CBC TV's The National the day after they folded, and to sort of see the way that was covered by our national broadcaster, to see the extensive coverage that TSN provided the next day, to see how some of the local stations covered it. To me, it's just fascinating. And of course, you know, Montreal later came back, and there's going to be a lot of these things where the threads are going to come and go over the course of time as this stuff all rolls out. I'm just looking at some old footage from 1990, with the league considering should they change the import ratio, and you know, we've had that discussion so many times over the years. So yeah, it really is. The league's fortunes have risen and fallen, and eventually, when this archive is complete, when everything I've got is uploaded, there will be a way to kind of trace its fortunes through the way the broadcast media covered it over the course of those decades.
When we talk about the ratings not being so good for 84, 85, 86, because I think about that, right? Where did the CFL lose Toronto? Where did they lose ground to the NFL in this country? And have we pinpointed it to maybe the fact that more and more Canadians were getting cable television and started watching the NFL and started realizing, you know what, maybe there is a league that's higher quality than this one? Was it the success of the Toronto Blue Jays, who in 84 started to look really good and started to turn the Canadian public on? Or maybe it was a little bit of both?
Well, it was a little bit of several factors, actually, and it's funny. I've contemplated this for a long time. I've sometimes thought that I may eventually have to write a book about how the brand declined, and I'm talking more specifically about the brand of the Toronto Argonauts, which in the 1970s was on a par with the Toronto Maple Leafs in the market in the biggest market in the country. I mean, Argonaut stories got more prominent play in the newspapers and on TV than Maple Leaf stories often during that decade. But you've cited the Blue Jays. Not only was it that they actually got good in 83 and then they got to the playoffs in 85, but even when they got there in 77 and they weren't a very good team, they were marketing very effectively to young families and to kids at the same time as Carly O'Keefe was ignoring marketing the Toronto Argonauts. There was a huge pent-up demand for the Argonauts to win a championship. They hadn't won since 52, and so finally they broke the drought in 83 after 31 years. And at that point, it just coincided with the Blue Jays are now a good team. And I think a lot of sports fans in Toronto said, okay, finally we've got what we wanted. Now we can move on to the new thing. Now we can pay attention more to the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox than the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And that's not to besmirch the Saskatchewan Roughriders, but we're talking two different magnitudes of sort of international glory, if you want to call it. The NFL, it wasn't just that it was being seen on cable, and that absolutely was a huge part of it. It was also the fact that the salaries started to go in different directions. I mean, in the 1970s, the CFL, Montreal and Toronto outbid the NFL for some big name players. That stopped happening after 81 when the Alouettes blew their brains out on Vince Ferragamo and some other guys. And then the USFL came along, and that really pushed salaries up in the NFL. And suddenly the biggest players in the NFL were making way more money than the biggest players in the CFL. And so it started to look small time by comparison. And I mean, we can look at a whole pile of other factors, the blackouts that were in effect for so many years, particularly in Southern Ontario, where you had two teams within a 45-minute drive of each other's. And there was a thing called the secondary blackout, where if the Hamilton Tiger Cats were playing a game later in the day, the Toronto Argonauts road game couldn't be shown because it might impinge on the crowd that was going to go to Hamilton, things like that. I listed a number of factors in Year of the Rocket, and I actually think there's a whole book to be done about this at some point, because there are so many factors in the decline of the CFL in its stature compared to where it was. Honestly, it's the growth of other pro sports. The CFL has the same number of teams now that it had when the NHL had 6 teams. Now the NHL's got 32, and they're going to go to 36 probably in the next few years. The NFL's 32. Basketball is 30. Baseball is 30 or 32. The CFL, because it's in this small country that doesn't have a very huge population base, has really nowhere to expand in Canada. They tried the U.S., didn't work, although I think a case can be strongly made that it actually bought them time to stay alive. But people look at it and go, it's a 9-team league, right? And 6 teams make the playoffs out of 9, and often the East Division is terrible. And so it just, all these factors. And then you look at the excitement of the NFL, where with 32 teams, there's always going to be exciting games every Sunday. There's also going to be some dogs, but there's always going to be some exciting games, and there's going to be a good disbursement of the big name talent throughout a bunch of markets. And the networks, of course, have done a fantastic job of broadcasting NFL games, arguably much better than has ever been done by CBC, CTV, TSN, or any other Canadian network. So it's just a greater spectacle. So again, and I could probably rhyme off 5 or 10 other reasons why it's happened. That's a whole discussion for another day too, I suspect.
Yeah, and that's a big problem with the CFL, is just a lack of inventory. And like you said, that's not an easy thing to solve, because if you go to the States, you open up a whole other can of worms. And doing it in Canada, we're only limited so much. One thought that I've kicked around, and we'll worry about logistics later, but I almost wonder if the solution for the Canadian Football League is get that franchise in the Maritimes, get the franchise in Quebec City, maybe London, Ontario, just because London is kind of on an island. It's not too close to Detroit, not too close to Buffalo. I lived in Windsor for a year. I truly believe that that region could do well with the CFL. You would be engaging markets that are not currently engaged, so you're growing things a little bit where you can in this country. But copy something from the NFL, and what I mean by that is they've got Mondays and Thursdays, we've got Fridays, the nights, and on weekends they've got Sundays. So let's take Saturdays. I don't know that Canadians care that much about U.S. college football. And I'm talking about Saturdays in the fall, September, October. Have 2 games simultaneously at like the early game, and then 2 games simultaneously late afternoon. Then have your Saturday night game. And then pick out 2 really good Canadian college games. So one will go simultaneously with the early games, one with the late games. That way you've got 3 games staggered at once, and you can offer something of a red zone package. To me, that's what the CFL needs in order to really ingrain in Canadians from coast to coast that what you do on Saturday afternoons is watch Canadian football. Now, I know we're up against it time-wise, but I would be curious to hear your response to that.
Well, I agree 100% that they need more teams. The Maritimes for sure. Quebec City would be fantastic. I grew up in London, Ontario. I'm not sold on London's ability to get behind a CFL team. I think if you could get Halifax and Quebec City and somewhere out west, I don't know where, maybe the Okanagan, maybe Kelowna, something like that. Although you've got to deal with getting in and out of there with flights and so on. But if they could ever get to 12 teams in Canada, that would go a long way towards it. I honestly think, though, they're going to be looking at the States. I really believe they're going to go back to looking at that again, especially with the rule changes and the change of the field size. I believe the long-term play is they're going to try that again, and I'm not opposed to it. I say I want to always be able to go and watch the Toronto Argonauts. I've been a season ticket holder for most of the past 45 years, and whether they're playing on a 100-yard field or 110-yard field, or whether they're playing, the 3 and 4 downs, I don't think we're going to go to 4 downs, but I want to see a Canadian football team in my city, and I will support whatever they can do to make that happen. And I'm worried about it, frankly. I think the Argos are a tenuous franchise. They have been for a long time. They've got a great, really wealthy owner, obviously in MLSE, but I don't know that MLSE is long-term committed to them. So I think they're behind a lot of the changes, and they want to see what they can do to grow the value of the entire enterprise, the league as a whole at each of these franchises, and having more franchises and more TV inventory would go a long way towards doing that.
Yeah, and sometimes we get annoyed out west that Toronto's trying to run everything, whereas my perspective is I'm all for it right now, whatever we've got to do to make the Argos good and strong, because without the Argos, we probably don't have a CFL, and without the CFL, we don't have the Riders, and everybody has to understand that big picture part of it. Canadian Football Time Machine is the YouTube channel if you want to check it out, and The Year of the Rocket is the book if you want to check that out, about the year of Rocket Ismail with the Toronto Argonauts, author Paul Woods. Good of you to join us. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you for having me, Brendan. Really enjoyed it.
Okay, that was great. And a lot of the stuff that I find on that channel really shows there's a lot of Rider-themed stuff, too. There's like reports from during the Riders' 89 season and some of the turmoil they went through before ultimately winning the Grey Cup, how Bill Baker came and went as the CFL commissioner. Time to take a break. Still ahead in hour one, we will check in with Farhan Lalji, who's somewhere south of the border. You are watching and listening to the Sports Cage on the Rough Rider Broadcast Network, 620 CKRM. Brendan McGuire and Colson Schultz on this Friday Sports Cage for Nelson Homes. You know, we've had so many changes on this program over the years that I've had the good fortune to come in and guest host from time to time, but Nelson Homes has been one of the constants, so we thank them for being the great sponsors that they are. Still ahead on this edition of the program, we're going to get you all ready for the Pats game tonight. This is a big weekend. They are the 7th seed coming in, and they have lots of teams chasing them from behind, and they're going to have to fight like tooth and nail just to lock down that playoff spot on this ever so important season. Dante De Caria will have the call on 620 CKRM tonight. Puck drop at 7 o'clock. Also ahead, Eric Francis from Calgary. There's lots to unpack. Gee, I wonder what we're going to talk about with Canada winning the semifinal game over Finland in thrilling fashion. Right now, the U.S., we're watching, we got it on the monitor, just scored again. They're up 4-0 on the Czechs, or on the Slovaks, I should say. And, you know, I have to confess that when Canada lost in the World Juniors, it didn't bother me all that much. Like, I was really cheering for them, but the U.S. was already out. And if we lose to the Finns or if we lose to the Swedes, I can live with all that. But I don't know how I'd take it as a fan if we lose to the U.S. And so it's like in the semifinal game, I'm kind of conflicted because I'm like, well, if the Finns win, you know, I like the Finns. And if the Finns win a gold medal, I think that would be kind of cool. But then I realize if the U.S. wins the gold medal and we lost out in the semifinal, we have to sit and watch them beat an inferior team. That's not going to make us feel any better either. And it's kind of like in life, you just have to get past your fears and not worry about, gee, what would it be like if we get all the way to the gold medal game and lose? That's still better than not getting to the gold medal game, period. You just have to root for your team. And when you get to the final, losing to the Americans is no worse than if we had lost that semifinal game. So it was a great comeback at the end. Shea Theodore with the big game-tying goal, just under 10 minutes to go. And then in the final 32 seconds, I think was on the clock, when Nate the Great got the go-ahead game-winning goal. And they kept showing the replay over and over, and there was a lot of debate whether they were offside or not. And in the moment, they all said, even Chris Cuthbert, I love how he framed it. He said, well, we're wearing our Canadian-made glasses, and we think that it's good. I thought it was good looking at it. I thought the evidence was non-conclusive, and I'm not a fan of those reviews anyways. I think that's silly. Like, there are a lot of reviews that are totally necessary. I think football, most of their reviews are necessary because you've prepared all week for that one game, and I realize there's a lot of magnitude in this hockey game. I don't think that type of review is appropriate in hockey. I think they spend way too much time trying to figure out if somebody was offside by a hair. I just don't think that's the appropriate thing to review. I think it delayed this game because it was non-conclusive. There was nothing in there that told us one way or the other. I've seen a few commenters online suggest that it was offside, but there's nothing in any of the video that I've seen that would suggest that it was. I thought it was totally fine, and it would have been devastating if that got overturned and they ended up losing the game. But it didn't happen that way. And it means a lot more, I think, to the Canadian fans. Sorry, you were going to chime in. You had some. You look like you're just percolating, and you had something you wanted to add.
Just waiting. The few pictures I've seen. Again, you can't see where the puck is, so
it was kind of up in the air on an angle.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. You can see whether the players are across the line or not, but you can't see where the puck is when it happens. So it kind of is what it is. No, I was going to hop in back when you were talking about, you'd be okay if Finland or Sweden went and won. Finland won gold last year, so I think it's someone else's turn now. But
you mean the last Olympics?
Correct.
Yes. When we didn't have the dream team format because
Correct.
We didn't send the NHLers because of worries about COVID and.
Yeah, it's actually crazy looking at the top three finish last year. The women's side, it was Canada, U.S., Finland, but then on the men's side, it was Finland, the independent athletes of China.
Or of Russia?
The Russian Olympic Committee. That's what it is.
Olympic athletes from Russia.
Yeah,
and then eventually we had to get rid of that.
Whatever they called it. Yeah, they got silver, and then Slovakia with bronze. So, and Czechia these last few years seems to be our Achilles heel too. Like, they have played us to the bitter last second every single time, any format, World Juniors, Olympics, Championships, whatever. So I'm really curious to see how Czechia keeps developing. That I find is going to be fun. But
that's not totally new, though. Like,
no.
The very first Dream Team Olympics, I call it the Dream Team format because that's really what it is.
Yeah.
And the Czech Republic, which is what they were called back then, they won the first gold. Now, it was a David versus Goliath matchup. I'll never forget that semifinal game. Nagano was a lot of fun because you'd get up at like 3-4 in the morning to watch the games, and Hasek stood on his head. It was unbelievable. And I remember Canada tying it with, I want to say, definitely under 2 minutes for sure. Yeah. And then they didn't put Gretzky out in the shootout, and they put Ray Bourque instead. I think you could have lived with it, but the fact was they put Bourque on the ice, who's the same age. So he had the same age concerns, and Bourque was a defenseman, so I'm not sure that he's going to do any better on a breakaway than Wayne Gretzky, but that's here nor there.
Yeah.
And I don't know. We don't know that he would have scored. We'll never know. But it felt like a two-man show. It was Jágr and Hasek. And so I have always taken them seriously since then as a result. I liked the format better in Nagano because you had the Elite Six. So the Elite Six were Sweden, Finland, the Czech Republic, Russia, Canada, and the U.S.
Yeah.
And so you had a preliminary round before they got there, which made a lot of sense because it was good for the NHL because then their interruption didn't have to be as long. It was like 8 days, 10 days, their participation in that tournament instead of the full 16 days. And you didn't have a lot of these nothing games. Like, I don't get excited about watching Canada play Switzerland or France or, and I remember the two teams, I want to say it was Belarus and maybe Latvia that made it from the preliminary round. But the tournament was great. The games were great. And that's one of my favorite Olympics of all time, even though Canada didn't win the gold. And so it doesn't surprise me that we're having trouble with Czechia because we've had trouble with that country, whatever it's been called, ever since this format has started. And it's great to see it back again because it's been way too long since we've had the Dream Team format. And I think it also adds to the fact that I only want to see this every 4 years.
Yes.
I don't want to see these little side tournaments because it's like we had this great moment last year with the Four Nations Cup, but wouldn't it be nice if that could just linger for a few more years? It's the finality of it. It's kind of like why the NFL does so well because they have such a scarcity of inventory that they can offer. Whereas if we're doing it every 2 years, some are saying that we should have the Four Nations Cup every year. There was a lot of that talk in the late 90s because you had the All-Star game that was North America versus the world, and we should do this every year. And it got old fast. And I just feel like you can, forgive my language, but bastardize a product if you have too much of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think every 4 years is the way to go. And it doesn't make me sad at all that the Russians aren't involved. I think it would be a better tournament if they were in. But I know it drives the Russians and the Russian government crazy that they can't be part of this. So let's keep driving them crazy to the point that maybe they'll stop doing what they're doing in Ukraine and other things around the world. And we can get back to having them as part of the Olympics and hating them instead of the Americans, because it feels like the Americans have occupied their space. We're at a point where it was always a rivalry with the U.S., but it was kind of a friendly rivalry. And now it's like they're the bitter rival. If we could get Russia back in, we could go back to where it was. Yeah. Anyways, that's all I got on that. Still ahead on this edition of the Sports Cage, we will check in with Farhan Lalji. We will also get you ready for the weekend with the Regina Pats. You are watching and listening to the Sports Cage on the Rough Rider Broadcast Network, 620 CKRM. Friday edition of the Sports Cage with Brendan McGuire and Colson Schultz for Nelson Home, supplying home packages and RTMs for over 65 years. Still ahead on this edition of the program, Eric Francis from Sportsnet, and recapping that semifinal victory, Canada getting past the Finns barely, a 3-2 win, the game winner, Nate McKinnon. I just called him Nate because I think of him as Nate the Great. Nathan McKinnon, with 32 seconds left, gets the game winner, and Canada is going to the gold medal game against what very much looks like will be Team USA, who right now are just piling right over the Slovaks with a 5-0 lead. So it's looking like we're going to get a rematch from what happened in the Four Nations Cup, and a lot of people probably expected that, and we're probably okay with that. The gold medal game, by the way, it'll be early Sunday morning. The puck drop is scheduled for 7:10 Saskatchewan time on Sunday morning. So that's an early start for a Sunday, but I know a lot of you will be getting up early to watch that game. I suspect some of the bars will be serving drinks around the country, especially in the Eastern time zone. I remember that was a thing in Sochi as well. I don't know how many need to drink that early in the morning to watch a gold medal game, but I'm sure there are some, and that just adds to the festivities around it all. Canada not putting up the medal totals that we saw in Vancouver, and I know there's been a lot of talk about that this week when Dave Thomas was on with Arash Madani, and yesterday when we spoke with Arash about how we're still living off the remnants of the robust Canadian Olympic program that we had in 2010 for Vancouver, because there was a long lead up to that. I think that a lot of us don't really know the logistics to what goes behind that. I know I'm infinitely curious, like what's changed? What's different? Was it government funding? Was it just the right people running the program? But I suspect that's going to be more of a discussion in the years ahead. A good number of us would make the case that we don't have money to put into this. And I'm talking about government tax dollars, particularly given the ongoing trade dispute with the United States, that I don't think is over, even though we got some good news today from the U.S. courts. But there will be a lot of you out there who feel like this is a non-issue. It doesn't really affect my life if Canada gets 30 medals or gets 5 medals. It just doesn't matter. And they should just be able to rely on corporate Canada to fund it. I'm probably in that camp, except I would advance the argument that I think it is somewhat important. I think it's a way to make Canadians feel good about themselves. I think it's a way to promote national unity. And I would also suggest that it's a good way to get athletes excited about playing the different sports. And it's not the hockey that's causing the problem. It's not the curling. It's not the usual sports. It's a lot of those side sports. We're not hearing so much of people winning medals out on the courses. I know today we did add a bronze from Brendan McGuire in men's freestyle skiing halfpipe. And we're probably missing out on like skiing events, skating, probably speed skating, and maybe the snowboarding too. So I don't know what the answer is. It's not the end of the world. It would be nice. Boy, it was a lot of fun in Vancouver to see Canada cleaning up and setting the record for the gold. I remember Kevin Martin, the curler, had a great line where he said, it felt like it was the first Olympics where we dominated and did really, really well and didn't feel like we needed to apologize for doing so. And it was a great moment for the country. we're not going to see that in this Olympics, and you're probably going to see that anytime the Olympics are in Canada and even in North America. I remember Atlanta 96 with Donovan Bailey winning the gold and then winning on the 4x100 relay. It makes a really big difference when you have a games either on your home soil, at least in your own time zone, and more people get excited about it. And I think more athletes get excited about it, and it helps drive the motivation for those athletes to get in shape and be ready to compete at those games. And it's not so easy to do that when it's far away or in another country that's in another time zone. I will say this, it's pretty cool to get up every morning and be able to watch the Olympics on TV. I will miss that next week after the games are done. Some of the Olympics that have been overseas have been some of the best. I remember Nagano in 98. It was a 15-hour time difference. So their day was starting at 6 p.m. local time. So that was perfect for Canadian viewers. You get home, you have supper, you turn on the TV, and you watch the Olympics.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag because I appreciate the early mornings here because it's about, let's say it's noon and they're finishing up in Italy. And I'm like, okay, what happened today? And I can just go through the whole list and it's all ready. So for us, it's easy to talk about because the whole day is complete already, basically by the time we get here. But yeah, it is also nice to head home and have things just getting started. So it's a balance with that. But
I know that one big issue on American television with NBC doing the Olympics, I think every year since Nagano. I think CBS did Nagano, and since then it's always been NBC. NBC has decided that's just part of their shtick, is to do every Olympic Games, and it's a loss leader, kind of like the National Football League is for a lot of networks and sports programming in general. I don't know how profitable any of it is. It's really, really expensive. Ruinously expensive in a lot of cases. And I think it's more of an overall strategy to get people engaging with that network. And NBC for the longest time refused to show live coverage that was outside of prime time. So in other words, if it was overnight, they wouldn't show it live overnight. The CBC always did, and it ruffled feathers of people in the United States who would complain, well, if the Canadian Broadcast Corporation can do it, why can't you do it? And then it became more and more of an issue as this thing called the internet started to pick up steam. So people would know the results well ahead of when they were actually airing it. And when Dick Ebersol continued to run sports at NBC, he kept refusing to put more live stuff on because he said it's got to air in prime time and that will protect it for the sponsors. It's just best if it's in prime time. And then near the end of his tenure, they started to pledge to do more live stuff because there were other bidders.
Yeah.
I think Disney, ESPN was offering to do more live stuff. So that's pushed NBC to do more of that. But it's a big issue, and the ratings are not good for live Olympic programming overnight.
It's more of a marketing thing than a trying to make your money back thing because, we broadcast the Olympics, we broadcast the NFL, the CFL, whatever it is, right? It's more of a brag for your network.
You know what? I don't know how different it is from the fact that we have the rights here at Harvard Media for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, right? It's a great thing to wrap your arms around because they're the number one game in town. And the Olympics are kind of the same thing. There are not many brands that you can wrap your arms around that are bigger than the Olympics. And a lot of their programming, even soap opera in the middle of the day, will have that little NBC Olympic logo. They'll have those Olympic rings. Yeah. And I don't know how you put a price on that.
Exactly.
But one thing I did find interesting is that we have a public broadcaster, which is the CBC, which is government funded, largely government funded. And then we have the private broadcaster, which is Bell Media and CTV. When the games were in Vancouver or any time they're in North America, actually when they were in Calgary, those Olympics were on CTV because they probably saw a way to recover most of their costs because the games are going to be right here. We're going to have massive audiences. You're going to have everything live in our time zone that we want it to be live. And then once they start shifting overseas again, they seem to have no interest, probably because it's not nearly as viable. It's really, really expensive to do that kind of a broadcast. And that was at an era when 2010 Vancouver happened. It was at a time that CBC was losing not just the Olympics, but a lot of their major properties. Like the hockey was slipping away because Sportsnet was swooping in.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of seen as, well, we don't need CBC Sports for this anymore. But then after Vancouver, and I want to say 2012, maybe London, after that, all of a sudden, everything was back on CBC because I think the private sector just decided this is not a profitable thing. We've got to rely on the public broadcaster to do it. But it's crazy expensive for the networks to put all this stuff up, and it generates interest, but not enough interest to actually foot the bill for all this stuff.
Yeah.
There you go. That's all I got on that.
There we go.
Still ahead on this edition of the program, we will go to Calgary to check in with Eric Francis to not just pick apart the game that just happened, but actually talk about the gold medal game that's coming up on Sunday morning. I think a lot of people will be curious to see how that's being handicapped. I have a pretty good idea as to who Canada is going to play. It's 5-0 U.S. through 2 periods. So any thought of the U.S. getting knocked off before we'd have to do it ourselves in the gold medal game is disappearing quite rapidly before our eyes. You are watching and listening to the Sports Cage on the Rough Rider Broadcast Network, 620 CKRM. Boy, what a great day for Canada. The Canadians beating the Finns 3-2 in thrilling fashion in the semifinal of Olympic men's hockey to advance on to Sunday morning's gold medal game. Shea Theodore tied the game with just under 10 minutes to go in the third period. It wasn't looking good for a while there. And then with 32 seconds left, Nathan MacKinnon scores the winner, punching the Canucks ticket to Sunday morning's game that will start at 7:10 a.m. Saskatchewan time and will almost certainly be being played against the United States, who have a big lead on Slovakia in the other semifinal game. No surprise there. The Canadian women's curling team will not win gold. Instead, Rachel Homan's Rink will have to try and settle for bronze after losing this morning 6-3 to Sweden's Anna Hasselberg. They'll face Team USA tomorrow morning at 7:05 Saskatchewan time for that bronze medal game. Meanwhile, the men's gold medal curling game, Canada versus Great Britain, will be at 12 noon on Saturday. Canada added to its medal total today as Brendan McGuire added a bronze in men's freestyle skiing halfpipe. And just while we quickly glance at the medal count standings, Canada has 17 medals and are in the 11th position. Norway still destroying everybody with 37. The U.S. in second with 29 medals. Some other things happening. Western Hockey League tonight, the Edmonton Oil Kings at Regina Pats, 7 o'clock puck drop from the Brandt Center. We'll have it for you here on the almighty 620 CKRM. Pre-game show with Dante De Caria will be at 6:30, and he'll join us on this program in hour 3 as well. Other games around the Dub tonight. Prince Albert is at Moose Jaw. The Prince George Cougars visit the Swift Current Broncos, and the Saskatoon Blades are in Alberta to face the Red Deer Rebels. That's your sports ticker for Reliance Heath Water Heater Rentals, keeping you in hot and soft water. Call on Reliance. Colson Schultz with you on this Friday Sports Cage. Still ahead in hour 3, we'll tee up the weekend for the Regina Pats. Dante De Caria, the voice of the Regina Pats here on the almighty 620, will join us. And I know from my day job, I'll be hosting a whole bunch of clients down at the Brandt Center. And those tickets just flew off the shelf. This is a really busy time of year where everybody wants to go see the Pats, especially with the kind of weather that we've had lately. And the Pats are a much bigger contender this year than they've been the last couple of seasons. Also, Jeremy Roenick will be in Yorkton tomorrow night, and he's on his way to the 306. We're hoping to touch base with him once his flight lands in the Queen City. You can chime in by calling 1-866-767-0620 or on the text line 306-936-6262. Also still ahead, we will do our sprinkle of the day for Sports Select. But right now, let's go to Eric Francis.
Now for Inside the NHL with Eric Francis on the Sports Cage. Inside the NHL is brought to you by Sports Select. Getting in on more of the sports action you want is as easy as playing at sportselect.com. Simply make your picks online, generate your QR code, and lock in your bet at your local Lotto Spot retailer.
I have no idea what on earth we're going to talk about today. It's not like anything's been happening in the hockey world at all. I was going to ask you, Eric Francis, are you bragging and strutting around with your chest puffed out that you wrote that piece that Macklin Celebrini should be on the team and then he's had such a good tournament?
No, but it's funny. I did write a piece just before I sat down with Macklin. He was in Calgary, and I just was one-on-one with him at his hotel. And it's because that's strange to say, but I just wanted to hug him. And I wrote a column about how Canadians are going to fall in love with this guy at this tournament. And I think obviously they have on the ice, but I think also his aw shucks, attitude off the ice is also so endearing, so Canadian. He's just Sid 2.0 in every way. And, on Sunday, we're going to ask him to be that, at
Oh, we lose him? That's okay. We'll get Eric right back. But that's interesting. I didn't know that about Macklin Celebrini. It sounds like he's got the aw shucks. When he says Sid 2.0, he's that kind of player, although obviously he's not going to put up the kind of stats that Sidney Crosby's going to put up. And he's not going to fill the void in the dressing room, which kind of made me think when Canada was losing to the Finns, if they can't come back and tie this up, if we're going to look back on this and think that Sidney Crosby's injury is what cost Canada a shot at the gold. And he's an older player. They're more susceptible to get injured. I'm not saying that's why he got injured. And you're going to take that risk in an Olympic tournament. Listen, Sidney Crosby could be in the NHL and be a shell of his former self 4 years from now. And at that point in time, he would be 42 years old, and you're still going to have him in the lineup. So that's the next thing I wanted to talk about. You were just to pick up what you were saying about Macklin Celebrini being Sid 2.0. Are you talking about just his style of play or his demeanor, or what exactly?
everything. And like everything about him. When I asked him a lot about Sidney, and he's been asked a lot about Sidney Crosby since they played at the World Championships on a line together last year. I said, what did you learn from him? And he said, everything. I listened to every word he said and how he spoke to his teammates, what he asked teammates, what he asked me, what I asked him. But he said, every bit as important was I just watched how he treated people off the ice. And he said it was just, you hear about how Sid is. I've dealt with him for years. He's just classy human. Look, there's Wayne Gretzky. It got passed down from him. I guess you could say from him to Sid to Celebrini. I know I'm missing some people in there, but those are three people that I always say this. You'll never see them embarrass themselves, their country, their sport, or their team. And I really feel strongly about that with Celebrini, that he's going to follow in that same mold as those two other guys. And that's some pretty incredible company.
Yeah, I had no idea he was that impactful. And admittedly, I don't watch as much hockey as I once did. And so that's a really interesting take. And he's definitely been I don't want to say unsung hero. He's the guy who's really stood out at the Olympics because the world is learning pretty quickly how good he really is. Was there any point during the game today where the Canadians were losing and you wondered out loud if Sidney Crosby's injury and the fact he couldn't go in this game could end up costing them the gold medal?
Well, I think the minute he hobbled off the ice the other day, we all worried the same thing. Look, he's not playing on Sunday. There's no way he's playing on Sunday. The legend of Sidney Crosby is such that we'd like to believe that he could, and they'll tape it up and they'll shoot it up and they'll do whatever they can. But I have zero expectation that Sidney Crosby is even seriously considering playing on Sunday. I know they're paying lip service. If you think about the quote that John Cooper said when they asked him today, about him playing on Sunday, he said, well, he's got a better chance of playing Sunday than he did today. Well, the chances today were 0. So what did he really say in that sentence? He said nothing. In other words, it's not happening. So I hope people aren't losing too much sleep, wondering what if. It's not happening. And so we're going to have to deal with that. And that could cost us. It could ultimately cost us the gold medal. Look, I think we're the underdog going into this game, and who cares? I'm not trying to, I wouldn't suggest the team should be suggesting we're the underdog, they're the underdog. Who cares? They're both juggernauts. This is the matchup everybody expected and everybody wanted. But without Sidney Crosby in the lineup, I seriously think that if this was a 50-50 battle, it tilts it in the Americans' favor just that much more, and I hate that.
I like your comparison to the John Cooper quote. That's like me saying that today I'm the oldest I've ever been. And you're right. There's and athletes and politicians do that all the time. You mentioned this is a rare instance where Canada is legitimately the underdog. And one quote I heard after Canada won the Four Nations Cup was, "Hey, the Americans, they're going to get us one of these years." And I don't know. I feel like we've lived with that worry for over 30 years. I remember the World Cup in '96 when the Americans beat us and just how terrifying that was. And here we are 30 years later, and we're still dominating all the time until now. Do you ever get the sense that this team, the way they scraped by Czechia and the way they scraped by the Finns, is one that is not only dramatically different from Sochi, the last Olympics, probably the best Olympic team ever, that just steamrolled everybody, but just hanging on?
They did dominate earlier in the tournament. Then when the games started mattering, I mean, it didn't look good in the final 10 minutes of either of those last two games. And I would argue that we've been getting some pretty lucky breaks. We've been getting all the breaks. Two challenges that, in that last game, I think goalie interference would have, I don't think they should have challenged, but I think had they challenged, I think they would have won the challenge. We'll never know. But the challenge they did make, I mean, that was millimeters we're talking about. That was very fortuitous for Canada that the goal stood. I just feel like, we've been, I don't want to say lucky. You earn your breaks and we are the best in the world. But, man, you nailed it. I literally just texted that to my friend about 5 minutes ago saying, Sunday's game is the game that I've been terrified for 30 years. It's exactly what you had just said. Look, eventually the Americans are going to dominate the NHL like we used to, or dominate the hockey world the way we have forever. It's just a numbers game. They have 10 times the population. They have more resources than we do. They will be the superior hockey nation at some point moving forward. Does it start Sunday? God, I hope not. But I've been fearing it for years.
Yeah, and does it kind of feel to you like the Americans today occupy the spot that the Russians once occupied? I felt like there was always a bit of a rivalry with the States, but it was kind of a friendly rivalry in some ways. It's like that all-star format they had for a little while, that it was North America against the world, our way against their way. And now I feel like we're at a point where the Americans are what the Russians used to be.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, if they tried to bring back the Canada-Russia rivalry, I'm not sure. I think it would take a long time for that to kind of take. But, I'm trying to compare in terms of I guess, would you say that the word would be hated? Do we hate the Americans right now? Because I do think a large chunk of our population watching that game on Sunday will go in with the same hatred that we carried into the Four Nations tournament because of all the politics that was going on at the same time. Then add in the Tkachuk brothers, who I think are phenomenal for hockey, but I get that they're disliked by pretty much everybody else outside of America. I just think there's a lot of reasons why hate is probably the biggest word. And maybe you could come up with a better word, but did we hate the Russians? Oh, we were terrified of the Russians. I'm not sure if we hated them, but I know in '72 we hated the Russians. I know that. But over the years, no, but I think we hate the Americans. Do you think that's fair?
I think it's a fair characterization. I think it's it's too bad that it's come to this, because I've never felt like I've hated the Americans my entire life. I personally, I don't hate the Americans as a fan. I don't like some of the things that are happening in the United States. I'm questioning some of their choices, just like I'm sure they question some of our choices from time to time. But it just feels that way with what has happened in these two tournaments. When I'm talking about the Four Nations Cup and this Olympic tournament. Phil Esposito said something that I thought was interesting when he was analyzing the 72 Summit Series about how it was capitalism, Canada, versus communism, the Soviet Union. And he said that was just way too much pressure on us, like looking back at it. And I just wonder, I felt like the athletes got dragged through the ringer representing all of us, probably not even understanding the politics of it, a lot of them, a year ago, and then having to do this again 1 year later. And this is another reason why I think this best on best shouldn't happen any more frequently than once every 4 years. What do you think?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I think it should happen every 2 years, with the World Cup of Hockey that they're going to start doing every 4 years, alternating with the Olympics. That's perfect. I agree with you. You don't want it too much, but you want it way more than we've had it over the last 12 years where we haven't had any of it. So, and I just want to clarify, when I say hate the Americans, I don't mean the people. I mean the team, the hockey team, and what they represent, and what, the threat that they present the Canadian team in terms of stealing our gold medal that we feel like we almost own and we have owned. It is a lot to ask, and that is a really, really interesting comparison you make to Phil Esposito, because they didn't want that. I mean, I always joke about that 72 Summit Series. Those guys, to get in shape for that series, some of them stopped smoking the week before. I mean, that was their training. None of them stopped drinking, but they stopped smoking for a week. And then suddenly they were thrust into this like incredibly powerful phenomenon that took over both countries. I don't know if that's similar like that right now, because it's not the Cold War sort of thing, but I tell you what, there's so much on the line. And I think almost anyone I talk to is just a casual fan, like my wife, or we're having people over. We're doing a BYOC party, a bring your own cereal. You can't get in without bringing a box of cereal at 6 a.m. on Sunday, and you got to wear your pajamas or Canadian jersey. And it'll be a moment to remember, but it could be a terrifying moment that my wife and all her friends that are coming over, they're scared. And guess what? So am I.
But you just have to remember, when Canada was losing to the Finns, my thought was, well, I could live with losing to Finland or Sweden. I just don't want to lose to the Americans. And then the more it's like the World Juniors. When I was watching all the World Junior games, getting into it, and then when the Americans were out, it's like, then we lost. I'm like, okay, well, I can live with this. But I also realized that if the Americans win the gold medal against the Finns, that's not going to make us feel any better either. So it was just a good little reminder in life. You have to confront your fears and not worry about that sort of stuff, and just get to the game. If you can get to the dance, anything can happen. And I do wonder if maybe the fact that the Canadians have had to go through some adversity, because even in a short tournament like this, I think that's still pretty important, could work to their advantage getting to that game. I confess I haven't watched the U.S. a whole lot, but we've got the semifinal game up on the monitor where they're out winning 5-1. It doesn't look to me like the Americans have had to face a whole lot of adversity in this tournament.
No, they haven't. So that's, they have not been as battle tested as Canada. You'd like to think that serves you well. And look, like I said earlier, with 10 minutes to go, or even going to that third period this morning, I don't think many people had many reasons to feel really optimistic, or, it certainly didn't look good or feel good. Let's put it that way. And a buddy of mine said, can we come back? And I just wrote back, it sure doesn't feel good right now, but shame on anybody who gives up on this team. And that's kind of the way I felt. And I didn't give up on them, but it's like I said, it looked bleak. But that's 2 games in a row where it looked bleak, and they found a way. So let's hope that if it starts to look bleak on Sunday, at some point, they tap into what they've tapped into the last 2 games and get the job done again.
Yeah, I think a lot about that team in 2002 in Salt Lake City when they got beat. I think it was 5-2 in the first game against the Swedes, and they didn't look good really the whole tournament. And I think the last game was like a 1-goal win over somebody who wasn't very good, and then they really came into form in the medal round and eventually beat the U.S. in the gold medal game. I think of Vancouver in 2010. They didn't look good during the regulation round, whatever you call it, and then they played their best hockey. So I think in these short tournaments, I think that it's okay to have to go through those moments where your mettle really gets tested. It's no different than the 72 Summit Series team that looked dreadful in the first 4 games in Canada, and they were able to storm back in the last 4. And by the way, I think I misinterpreted your question about hating the American team. We all know we don't hate the Americans, but it's okay to hate their hockey team as a fan, and I don't think that's too hard of a too strong of a word. We want to beat them, and the whole Tkachuk part of it. It really makes them loathsome to anybody who they're playing against. You'd love to have them on your side, and Brady Tkachuk wears the C for a Canadian team, and he'll go back to that when it's all said and done. But that's what it feels like, and it'll be an epic confrontation. And I think your idea of the BYOC is about the coolest idea I've heard of anybody for what they're going to do for this gold medal game. I'm hearing a lot of stories about, hey, bars are going to open early, and I'm like, do I really need to drink at 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning to enjoy this gold medal game? But I guess if we don't come out on top, that's what it might come to. Listen, we're up against it.
Before we go.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Colson.
I was just popping in here because you brought up the Tkachuks a couple times, and I saw this tweet, and I'm like, Eric, I think this is going to summarize them for you very well, and I think you'll appreciate it a lot. But this person on Twitter, whose name I can't say, says, someone referred to the Tkachuks as the Cybertrucks of men's hockey. And it just makes so much sense without any explanation necessary. So there you go. Use that at your free will on broadcast. I think that summarizes them pretty well.
That does. You look at those things and you just almost get angry just seeing them go by you on the street. So yeah. Hey guys, it's going to be like, it's funny, as a sports columnist for 30 years, it kind of beats the fan right out of you. I never care if the Flames win or lose or any team I ever cover. But when it comes to this, like, I remember what it's like to be a fan again, because I was nervous. And when they scored, I cheered out loud, scared the hell out of my dog. I get it. And so I'm with everybody on Sunday. Good luck. And I hope we don't start drinking at around noon to try and drown our sorrows.
And one more thing I just thought of, and I know exactly what you mean, because I've talked to other reporters this week who say I'm not a cheer in the press box kind of person, but it's hard at the Olympics. How much does it infuriate the people of Calgary every time they see Tkachuk have another big moment?
Yeah, you know what? I think almost people in this city are almost proud of Tkachuk. He's so half hate him still, especially since he left. Other half say, you know what? He was one of ours, and he's doing well, and good on him. I'm gonna flip it off in terms of a parting note. You know, as much as we hate the Americans and all that, and I am quite close with the Tkachuk family, the parents, both kids. I think they're wonderful people and great for the game. The Gaudreau family is at the Olympics right now, taking this all in. And so just when you really start to hate the Americans and wish horrible things on them, think of the Gaudreaus, and that'll soften them a bit, because it's impossible to not feel anything but love for the Gaudreau family.
I think Tkachuk's mom is Canadian too. I think he met her in Winnipeg, if I'm not mistaken. Keith.
Chantal is indeed from Winnipeg, and but I can tell you that she's not torn in any way in terms of allegiance at this tournament.
Well, I don't think that she would be, but yeah, I'm just making the point. Sometimes we get swept up in the hype of it all, and I know Keith Tkachuk was the happiest guy of anybody when the Atlanta Thrashers returned to Winnipeg, and he had played in both cities. So we will watch and be thrilled, and hopefully not drunk by noon. Eric Francis, thanks for this, and enjoy the game Sunday morning. I'll take you up on that. I'll take you at your word that Sidney Crosby will not play.
Yeah, it's not inside information. It's my gut. The way you walked off the ice, I can't see it happening. But, man, I hope for a miracle.
And if he can barely walk, do we even want him on the roster? So that is Eric Francis from Sportsnet and many other things, teeing up Sunday's gold medal game. That will be a 7:10 a.m. puck drop, Saskatchewan time, and it's very similar to the gold medal game I remember in Sochi. I don't remember exactly what time that game started, but it was early in the morning, and hopefully we won't feel the urge to drink when that game is done. Hopefully it'll be a day of celebration. The weekend has started off amazing for Canada with the win over Finland, and also the U.S. Supreme Court said that these tariffs are illegal. So what does that mean? I guess we will see, but it can only mean good things. We will be back with more of the Sports Cage on the Rough Rider Broadcast Network on 620 CKRM. I don't think there's any debate over who the clutch performer is there? I mean, you could give it to either one of the two Canadian scorers, the guy who tied it or the guy who got the game winner, but we'll just roll with Nate the Great. What do you think?
I can agree with that. That makes sense. I did find here, someone tweeted, Nathan, there's been a lot of posts going out about ice time, and the guys were on the ice for a long time at the end of the game there. And specifically, what was it, the Mac line that they're calling it, right? McKinnon, McDavid, and Celebrini.
Right.
They've had a lot of ice time this game. But McKinnon had played for 2:33 straight with one whistle before scoring the game-winning goal.
Wow, you used to see that in the 70s. You don't see it now with how quick they move. Yeah.
Yeah, and the further comments on it, he fired his one-timer with one skate in the air, totally sucking wind to the bench. Clutch right there.
Right when they needed it. It's hard to really know if we're just hanging on or if this is just what we needed for the adversity and test. Mm-hmm. I say our because it's the team, Team Canada, before the gold medal game on Sunday morning at 7:10 Saskatchewan time. The clutch performer for Kellen Solar. I think we are ready to go to Farhan.
It's time to get the inside story. TSN's Farhan Lalji on SportsCage is brought to you by the Cooperators. Time to get financially fit? Cooperators can build a plan that works for you. Cooperators, investing in your future together.
Farhan Lalji joins us on this Friday edition of the SportsCage. Is it true that you're near the White House? Is that where you are?
I am. You can probably see it over my shoulder. I'm in Washington, D.C., walking in the mall as we speak. Here visiting some schools with my son, potential universities for him down the road. And one of them happens to be Georgetown. So we're pretty close.
I'm going to make this one of our shorter segments because I just can't. I imagine you've got a million other things you'd like to do on this Friday. Hey, listen,
Sure.
I know you didn't get a chance to see the game, and or if you even know that Canada won, and they're in the semifinal round.
I did see the highlights from it. And I was following it along as we were on a tour. But they certainly don't want to make things easy, do they? The final goal, I can only imagine just what the emotions were like on the bench and certainly around the country when they were able to get that late in the game.
Are you hearing a lot of attention to the big story? And I know I know this is a sports show, but the sports and the politics of Canada, U.S. have been greatly intertwined over the last few years. Is there a lot of chatter about the news today that the Trump tax or the Trump tariffs were illegal and maybe the foot is coming off the throat a little bit and maybe everybody can breathe a little easier?
Yeah, I've heard the story, and I've certainly seen the reaction from the White House, again, not far behind me, and just the outrage on the part of the president. And it's predictable, it's disappointing. There was some conversation about that leading into this ruling that there were a lot of legal experts that thought that a lot of what was going on was illegal, and that it wasn't going to get past the Supreme Court. So certainly, it's a courageous decision by the judge. Glad he was able to make it. And look, since then, I know he's already said that he's going to add an additional 10% tax, which if the last one was illegal, I don't know how this one isn't. But anything's possible. He certainly believes he should be able to do whatever he wants, and he said that. He said that clearly. So this is why you've got multi-levels of government in the United States, where the one person just can't make that decision randomly. And we'll see what sticks.
One thing I have to ask you: could you see the construction of the ballroom?
I couldn't. No, I haven't been there yet. We're kind of walking in that direction, although I probably shouldn't after this show.
Good show. Good stuff. Okay. One thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about was obviously you were right there for Vancouver 2010. And I know you've been involved with lots of Olympic coverage through TSN, etc. Earlier this week, Arash Madani made some comments about how we're not up there in the medal count like we were in 2010 in Vancouver, the great own the podium story, etc. And most of us know very little about what goes on behind the scenes to create that. Is it government funding? Is it someone like Marcel Aubut who got a lot of the credit for it, rightly or wrongly? What does it really take to get back to that? And the comment that he made was that we are still living off the remnants of that. that a lot of the athletes who are winning were a product of that system, and we don't have that system anymore. And he was very gloomy about it. Now, you know what? I'm okay with some of that because I just want the reality of it. But is that your take on it? Do you feel like, as far as getting medals and being strong again at the Winter Olympics, we're going to have to make changes if we're going to get back to where we were in 2010 in Vancouver?
Yeah, look, there's no doubt that there was such a commitment around that concept going into 2010. People didn't want to just host the Olympics. They wanted to be celebrating the Canadian national anthem, and rightly so. And not only did government commit more, but government also encouraged in a number of levels for corporations to get involved, in more significant ways, right? So there were some incentives for those businesses. And that's also gone by the wayside a little bit. So, I agree with the concept that the commitment level that is coming on behalf of the federal government towards all of this isn't what it once was. And it's difficult because there's just so much more when you look at the United States and just the amount of funding that's available for these types of projects. It doesn't all come from the government. I mean, but it certainly comes from businesses that are incentivized, and there's connections to the Olympic program, and there's just so much more money available. And so and we've kind of gotten into a bad habit of just deciding that if Canada wins the men's hockey gold, that's going to be enough for us to say that, hey, it was a successful games. And certainly that was the cherry on top in Vancouver in 2010. But we can see in 2014 it wasn't nearly as successful, but then they wound up winning gold. And then in the subsequent Olympics after that, the men's hockey team wasn't there, so we just didn't have as much attention on the product. So I think there's a feeling that, whether it's a home Olympics, that Canadians care more. You tell me, right? Like, do Canadians care about these games? I'm seeing a lot of Norway, for example, and people talking about the sports system in Norway and how with a country the size of 5.6 million, they're able to get done what they do, right? And dominate the podium, especially in the winter games, but also make noise in the summer games with their programs. And certainly hockey's not front and center in Norwegian sporting culture, but they're able to find a lot of success at these games, and it doesn't necessarily take that level of funding. It's sports system, right? Whereas in North America, it's just all about funding, and Canada right now is falling short.
Yeah, and of course it's not about the hockey, because we're getting medals in both hockey, men's and women's, yep. And probably even both in curling. It's all the other sports that we're just not getting people, we're not grooming enough athletes, I guess, to be good and to be able to play at an elite level. And you're right, I don't know how many people do care that much, to be honest. It's not something that we talk about regularly, and that's part of the challenge to getting proper funding and proper infrastructure, is that there's just not, people are so busy with other things.
I'm seeing it in football,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Brendan, I'm seeing in football, for example, like Football Canada has so pivoted towards flag football because that's where potential government funding comes from, right? Whereas, me as a guy in tackle football, that would love, Football Canada to offer more funding to the grassroots level across the country, and it's just not available. But it all of a sudden becomes available when there's an Olympics. But even that is, kind of pales in comparison to what other countries have to deal with and what Canadians are dealing with in 2010. So, there still is an Olympic element to it, that there's more interest, more funding, more motivation, but it has dropped off from what we saw in our country 15 years ago.
Chatting with Farhan Lalji from TSN here on the SportsCage. I know I'm putting you a little bit on the spot because I know you know gridiron football inside and out as well as anybody, especially from the Canadian side. And I appreciate that flag football is not the same thing. It's a very different game. I've watched enough of it to know that. Do we know enough about the projection for this flag football in 2028 that Canada should expect to win the silver? Or is that something that we just don't know enough about yet to know if even the Americans will automatically win the gold just because they're the football nation?
Yeah, look, it's so hard to say, and I know that Paul LaPolice and his Canadian team did win that friendly against the United States, and it was their first loss in seemingly forever, and it made a bit of a ripple down here. And I'm curious to see what both these Olympic teams are going to look like. And, you need to learn this game because it's a little different than tackle football, and you can't just assume that if we get the best players from the NFL and the CFL that are going to be available to potentially play on this 10-man team, that automatically guarantees Canada second, because there are some people that have just play flag football full time. And you look at the American quarterback, and I forget his name, but he's 36 years old and he's been playing it forever. And there's so many techniques involved with flag football that I just don't know that NFL players are going to commit to, right? For for the United States team. And, there's a lot of people that feel that, well, these people have been the pioneers of the game. Well, I got news for you. It doesn't get into the Olympics without the NFL. So what is it all about? And is it about the NFL putting their money behind it to promote their brand or to promote the sport, right? And that really is important, because one of the things the NFL is also doing, and this is a different topic than what you've asked me about, that should Canada assume that they're going to get silver. My question is this going to continue after these Olympics, right? That we're putting all these resources and infrastructure into it. And, and again, certainly Canada doesn't compare to the U.S. in terms of what's being spent, but are we making a big deal about this only for something that's going to last one Olympic Games, right? Because I know that the NFL is also trying to commit some funding to the Australian Federation, because that's where the next Summer Olympics are, because the NFL wants to make sure that this isn't a one-shot deal and that it continues. And then Canadians are going to have to ask themselves again that, is this program going to be a continuous thing, and are we going to commit to it? They're doing more now than they've ever done before, but you've also just seen some changes at Football Canada, right at the top, with Kevin McDonald stepping down, and then they've kind of got to go through a process there to see what that's going to look like, and whether or not, because what's the priority for Football Canada? It's going to be to raise funds. It's going to be to go out and get sponsorships, so that these players, if you're getting NFL and CFL guys, and you think Canada should finish second, well, those guys are going to want some resources. They're not going to want to be paying their own freight if they want to stay involved in the flag football program.
Do you think there's going to be any meaningful disruption to the CFL? I know they're not going to stop the season. The schedule's just going to carry on. Do you think the league is going to lose enough guys that we're really going to notice all that much as far as the caliber of play or teams missing from CFL competition during the 2028 games?
Yeah, I mean, look, it sort of aligns better with the NFL than it does the CFL, because it's before their season starts, right? And I don't even know that it's going to disrupt training camp in terms of the timing of the game. So with the CFL, it's right in the middle of the season, so it does become more difficult. And I know that the CFL would love to see a certain number of their players involved, and you're looking at 10-player rosters. So is it going to be 5 NFL guys, 5 CFL guys, or is there going to be a couple that have never been involved or not currently involved in either? We certainly believe Nathan Rourke will be the quarterback if that's what Nathan Rourke wants. And if that's the case, then what happens, right? Do the Lions get a couple of bye weeks and things like that? When does training camp occur for this team? Because the Lions are going to give them up for much more than that. Justin McInnes, a player with length, somebody like that potentially gets involved. We obviously know about the Philpott brothers and their involvement, maybe the Ford brothers, right? So there's a lot of names that are going to be out there, but in the end, it's not going to affect that many players and that many teams. And those teams that it is going to affect are going to want a certain amount of scheduling concessions, because really that's all they can get at that point. But the league does want CFL players involved in those games.
Well, hopefully it's good exposure for the Canadian Football League in any way possible. I didn't realize that it was the NFL and their money was the driving force behind it. I'm excited about it because I love the sport, and if there's any way we can get people playing and playing it safe, then I'm all for it. So it'll be exciting, and even if it's a one-shot deal, it'll be great just to see what comes of it, even if it's a big, giant failure and it falls flat on its face. Hey, listen, I'm going to let you go because you've got bigger fish to fry on this Friday. You know what? This reminds me of when I had you on a talk show and you were at the Super Bowl in Miami and there was just total chaos in the background. But life's a little different now 20 years later when you're taking your kid down to look at going to school. So enjoy the trip and take lots of pictures.
All right, thanks for this, and I apologize for the hiccup a half an hour ago. Glad to join you.
It was all fine. It worked out. Terrific. Okay, that is Farhan Lalji joining us here on this Friday edition of the Sports Cage from the foot of the White House, practically on the front steps, though he couldn't see the construction of the ballroom that we keep hearing about. And apparently it's way over budget, and I think they have approval for it. I'm not sure that they figured out how to pay for it, but whatever. It's only money. Okay, a couple things we need to take care of here, or should we take the break? We'll take the break? Okay, we'll take a break. When we come back, we will do the sprinkle of the day. You are watching and listening to the Sports Cage on the Rough Rider Broadcast Network, 620 CKRM. Well, after a scare, Canada will play for gold after all in men's Olympic hockey. A 3-2 victory over the Finns. Come from behind. We're losing 2-1 until just under 10 minutes to go in the third period before Shea Theodore tied it. And then Nathan McKinnon got the game winner with 32 seconds to go. Bit of a controversial play. They reviewed over and over to see if there was an offside or not. They decided it was not conclusive, or there was no offside, and Canada hangs on for the victory. They're going to face the Americans, big surprise, who demolished the Slovaks in the other semifinal. Puck drop 7:10 a.m. Saskatchewan time, Sunday morning, and I wonder how many other households will have a BYOC, bring your own cereal and pajamas, to watch that gold medal game. The Canadian women's curling team will not win gold. Instead, Rachel Homan's Rink will have to try and settle for bronze after losing this morning 6-3 to Sweden's Anna Hasselberg. They will go against Team USA tomorrow morning at 7:05 Saskatchewan time. Meanwhile, the men's gold medal curling game will have Canada versus Great Britain. That will be a 12 noon start on Saturday. Canada did add another to its medal total today, as Brendan McKay added a bronze in men's freestyle skiing half pipe. Just to double check the standings here, Canada in the 11th spot. They've got 17 medals overall. Norway in first with 37. Some other things to talk about, of course. Western Hockey League play tonight. The Regina Pats are home to the Edmonton Oil Kings. Prince Albert is at Moose Jaw. Prince George at Swift Current. And the Saskatoon Blades visit Red Deer. We'll have that Pats game for you live here on the Almighty 620. Pre-game show at 6:30 with Dante De Caria. Puck drop at 7. He will join us in hour 3. SJHL action tonight. Humboldt Broncos are in Yorkton. Estevans at Nipawin. Melville goes to Flin Flon. The Warman Wolverines are in the Battlefords. Larange at Melfort, and Weyburn Red Wings visit the Kindersley Clippers. That is your sports ticker for Extreme Hockey and Sport. Whatever your spring sport is, Extreme Hockey has you covered. Brendan McGuire and Colson Schultz on this Friday edition of the program. Expecting to hear from Dante De Caria and hopefully, fingers crossed, Jeremy Roenick, who's somewhere taxiing down a runway in anticipation of his appearance in Yorkton on Saturday night. I know that'll be a big thrill for the locals to hang out with JR. Time for today's Sprinkle of the Day for Sports Select. You think you found a good matchup, Colson?
Well, we've got basketball back up now because their All-Star break is over. So
that's like the one sport going. You don't have NHL. You don't have, that's the only thing if you're going to go. Yeah.
Baseball, yeah. Well, spring training's getting started soon in baseball. But,
do people bet on spring training?
I wouldn't be surprised if they do. I don't know if you can find those numbers on Sports Select, but we've got basketball in front of us here. So who's your NBA team?
You know what? I have two teams, and I think I'm allowed to do that. I cheer for the Raptors, like so many others, for obvious reasons. And I became a big Minnesota Timberwolves fan about 15 years ago. We used to drive down there. We could sit in the 10th row for like $60 because the team was so bad. And I got into them when they had players like Johnny Flynn at point guard, and I've stuck with it ever since. And I was really thrilled when A-Rod became part owner of the Timberwolves, because they were always kind of vanilla, and I feel like he's just that little bit of extra hot sauce that they need. And the Wolves have been a lot more relevant and a lot more fun to watch since he's become involved. So I see you've got the game where they are facing the Dallas Mavericks.
They're pretty big favorites too, I would say.
And for point spread, I always think about the point spread, and I chat with somebody who will remain nameless. I don't want to use his name, but he makes a lot of money gambling, or so we're led to believe. And I've noticed that maybe the reason I never made any money gambling was because I was thinking of the winners, the losers, the parlays, the point spread. And the point spread's not that big, though, in this. It is. 14.5. That's a big point spread.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
So the Wolves are favored to win, and that's a tall order to beat anybody in the NBA by 15 or more points.
Yeah, it is the Dallas Mavericks, though, who...
Laughing stock.
That's one way to put it, yeah. I mean, they've had such a string of injuries, too, along with their questionable management of the team. So
I think Davis has missed a lot of games when they had Davis, and then they traded him to Washington.
Yeah.
They've kind of thrown in the towel. They're a team that's tanking. They're building around this Cooper Flagg, who supposedly he's the next big thing, but that changes every 5 years in the NBA.
Exactly.
So I'm going to look at the over-under. Anyways, the whole point of me bringing up the fellow who makes all the money gambling, he bets a lot on the over-under. Okay. That's just his shtick. And I feel like the Timberwolves are a good defensive squad. They were built that way when they got the French player, Rudy Gobert.
Yes.
That would have been really embarrassing if I couldn't name the best player on the team that I supposedly cheer for the most.
Well, I don't know if he's the best player anymore.
With the Timberwolves?
Yeah, because you've got Ant now. Anthony Edwards.
Right. Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Okay, so over, under, what the heck? I'll take the under. 239.5, the Timberwolves against the Mavericks, because the Mavericks aren't very good anyways.
No. And
the Timberwolves are built around defense. Even though he might not be their best player, I still think that's an interesting bet, and for that reason, I would take the under. I'm basically betting that the average point for both teams will be less than 120. And I think in today's NBA, that's a reasonable ask.
Yeah, I would say so.
So I'll be watching that with added interest.
Yeah, because even looking at the game above on Sports Select here, the Pacers and Wizards, the over-under is at 229.5.
Which is lower. That's 10 points less.
Yeah, and
those are teams that can actually score.
They can. Now, the Wizards just did a bunch of trades, so who knows what their team is going to look like, and chemistry-wise and everything. Indiana, I think, has had a slew of injuries, too. So that over-under is just... I saw that, and I was like, that's pretty low these days for an NBA game, I think. But we'll stick with our Mavericks and Timberwolves games. Sprinkle of the Day is brought to you by Sports Select. Getting in on more of the sports action you want, it is as easy as playing at sportselect.com. Simply make your picks online, generate your QR code, and lock in your bet at your local lotto spot retailer. Every bet is 100% legal with the chance of winning cash in hand. Sports Select, when you're ready to play, bet on the original. Must be 18 plus to play, and play responsibly.
And the money stays here. It doesn't go to some garbage offshore gambling site, and that's more important to me than anything else. Absolutely. I'll be curious to see how that bet plays out. Now you got me all excited about gambling again. Coming up in hour 3, we will check in with Dante De Caria to tee up the Pats game tonight and their weekend ahead, as well as hopefully we connect with the Hall of Famer, JR. You are listening to and watching the Sports Cage on the Rough Rider Broadcast Network, 620 CKRM. Brendan McGuire and Colson Schultz on this Friday edition of the Sports Cage, getting you ready for the weekend for Nelson Homes, supplying home packages and RTMs for over 65 years. Boy, Canada sure survived a major scare late this morning in that victory over the Finns. And when they beat Czechia, it was almost like the same game but over, same song, second verse, losing till halfway through the third period. And after the win over Czechia, Connor McDavid said they felt like the tournament flashed before their eyes. And I thought, okay, this is perfect. This is the moment of adversity that they needed to wake them up before the games really mattered. But then it happened again against the Finns. And you wonder, is it a good thing in that they have had their mettle tested so much, or is it a bad thing that it's just going to wear them out and they're just barely hanging on? Whereas you look at the U.S. team is just steamrolling everything in sight, blowout victory over the Slovaks. And I'm trying to think if this is the first time ever that Canada has entered a best-on-best competition match with the United States as the underdog. And I think it is, because Eric Francis makes the point that it's inevitable that one day the United States is going to be the best hockey nation on earth. And I don't know if I agree with that, because the United States has the money, they have the resources, they have the major league as far as most NHL teams. But remember, the United States absolutely dominated the world in basketball when the Dream Team concept first came about. The 1992 team that had Bird and Magic and Michael Jordan all together, I don't think Bird played at all because his back was starting to act up at that point, or had been for a while. And they were throttling teams. They were beating teams by like 30, 40 points regularly. There was no no contest, no competition whatsoever. But the IOC kept wanting them back. because they wanted the draw. And there was probably a lot more attention paid to basketball in the Olympics when the Dream Team was involved. So there's a lot of debate. Should we have the Dream Team? And then eventually we come up to 2004 in Greece. And I should back up for a second. In 96 in Atlanta, I remember the American team having to work for it a little bit more. And then in 2000 in Sydney, Australia, the U.S. barely got by Lithuania in a semifinal. And if Steve Nash hadn't fumbled the ball out of bounds, Canada might have faced the Americans in that semifinal. So you started to think, okay, it's great to have all these stars here, and it would be especially awesome if we could get a real legit competition out of it. And in 2004 in Greece, the Americans came up way short, and a lot of them took serious heat back home, saying, you guys don't care about the flag the way Canadian hockey players care about their flag. And Allen Iverson earned a dribble of respect by walking in saying, I want to win a bronze medal. This is after the Americans had been eliminated. And they won their bronze medal, but they continued to struggle for a while. Like, I don't have it in front of me, but I think in 2006 they had the World Championships. They didn't win that either. So they made a renewed commitment that in 2008 in Beijing, they were called the Redeem Team, and they pulled it off. But the competition since then has continued to tighten. And I'm not just talking about Canada getting better, which we are as a basketball nation, but it's the other countries like France. France is a legit gold medal contender. Spain has big stars on their roster. There are other countries who are stepping up. I mentioned France. And now you have a legit competition. So we shouldn't just assume that the Americans are going to get better than us at anything, or that they're going to advance. They do have more resources. They have 10 times the population, but they don't care about this sport the way Canadians do. And they never will. So I wouldn't get too concerned that the Americans are going to overtake us anytime soon as a hockey nation. Yeah, I remember the 96 World Cup like yesterday, when it was a giant upset, when players like Jeremy Roenick, like Doug Waite, I'm trying to think of who else was on that U.S. team, Adam Deadmarsh, went into the Molson Center, the new Molson Center, right after they replaced the old Montreal Forum. And it was a best of 3. Game 1 was in Philadelphia. Canada won. And then games 2 and 3 were going to be in Montreal. And it was just a stunner how the Americans beat us in games 2 and 3. And everybody in Hockey Canada behaved like the sky was falling at that point. That was 30 years ago. And since then, we've won 3 Olympic gold medals, 2002 in Salt Lake, 2010 in Vancouver, and 2014 in Sochi. And we haven't even been sending our best to a lot of the tournaments. In fact, we won so much that the desire to go to the Olympics really wasn't all that strong, that they were able to cancel it in 2018. So now that we haven't had best on best participation in 2018 or in 2022, absence makes the heart grow a little bit fonder. And now we have a champion, or an opportunity to win another gold medal. And people are freaking out that the Americans are overtaking us because they just looked so dominant in that tournament. And I think sometimes we make the assumption that the Americans are better than us at everything. And that's not always true. They have more people, and they have more things, and they have more resources, but they don't care about the sport the way we care about the sport. Hockey is so far down the list of priorities in the United States. There's football, there's baseball, there's basketball, and then there's golf and other sports that are more important than hockey. It is so far down the list, and that's why I don't worry that much about it. It's kind of like when NHL teams were moving south. I remember the Winnipeg Jets were relocating to Phoenix, and it felt like hockey was just dying in the city. And yet the amount of NHL players has just continued to flood out of Winnipeg since then, and now Winnipeg has their NHL team back, and Phoenix doesn't. If anything, the last 30 years have told us that Americans are less interested in hockey than we even realized at the very beginning. When you look at how much Canada drives the NHL in their annual revenues, it's astonishing. Gary Bettman openly worried when the Canada-US trade war started about what that would do to the Canadian dollar and how that could just shellac the NHL salary cap, because so much of the money is derived from the 7 Canadian teams, far outweighing on a per capita basis what they get from the 23 American teams. And that's even after factoring the foreign exchange and the Canadian TV contract with Rogers is massive when you consider an average of the 7 teams that they serve compared to the 23 teams that the TNT contract in the United States serves. So I don't think that Canada, being the number one hockey nation, is going to disappear anytime soon. And regardless of what happens in this game Sunday morning, that's not going to change it either. Just like when Canada won the Four Nations Cup, that didn't solidify Canada as the number one hockey nation forever. It can change every couple of years, every 4 years. And in the case of where they want to do the World Cup on alternating years, we're going to continue to have this best on best back and forth. I'm not a fan of doing the World Cup of hockey in those alternate years because I think you lose a bit of the magic when you give up the scarcity that you have. That's a big reason why the National Football League has been so successful, because they have a scarcity of inventory. It makes the event monumental when it only happens so often. Like during an NFL season, you've only got 17 games and a few playoff games, and that's it. Whereas in Major League Baseball, you've got 162 games, and they don't have the same level of scarcity. They don't get the same level of audience. And I think the same is true about hockey. I also think that it's a mistake to have the World Cup of hockey every few years because you are watering it down. And it's not fair to the athletes either, because the athletes have a really grueling schedule during the hockey season. I don't want to be killing their summers or their falls or messing with the NHL schedule. I feel like this should just be a one-shot deal every 4 years, and that's good enough for me. And that will help make the event what it is. A big reason why the Four Nations Cup was so special is because we didn't have a best on best in over a decade. It was special to see Connor McDavid and Sidney Crosby play together. Wouldn't have been such a big deal if we had seen it several times already. It's kind of like why Gretzky and Lemieux was so big in '87, because you barely ever saw it throughout their entire careers. You can chime in on the text line at 306-936-6262 or call us toll free at 1-866-767-0620. Some of the comments on the YouTube feed, Jeffrey, who likes to stir things up, he says, wait, you can take losing to Sweden or Finland more than the U.S. U.S. is superior to both those teams right now. I'd say more embarrassing to lose to them. Yeah, and Jeff's probably right, but I'm just making the point that those are nice countries. It's not part of the hostility happening between Canada and the United States right now. And it would just be a reminder that hockey is very much a global game. It's not a Canada-U.S. thing or even a Canada-U.S.-Russia thing. And those are great countries, and I don't feel the same level of hostility toward their teams as I do toward the United States. And if there were Russians playing, I would feel that level of hostility, not so much against those countries, but against their hockey teams as a fan. We'll step aside. Still ahead in Hour 3, we will check in with Dante De Caria to tee up the Pats weekend, facing the Edmonton Oil Kings tonight at the Brandt Center. You are watching and listening to the Sports Cage on the Rough Rider Broadcast Network, 620 CKRM. It's the Friday Sports Cage for Nelson Homes, supplying home packages and RTMs for over 65 years. Brendan McGuire and Colson Schultz on this edition of the program. Big things happening down at the Brandt Center tonight. The Regina Pats taking on the Edmonton Oil Kings. Puck drop at 7 o'clock, 6:30 pregame show here on the almighty 620 CKRM. And the man who will bring you that pregame show is the voice of the Pats, one Mr. Diamond, Dante De Caria. Dante, the Pats Pats are 7th right now in the Eastern Conference, and I know there's 2 teams within striking distance, Moose Jaw and Red Deer, coming into the weekend, and it's critical they stay in the top 8 slot. And you're facing a team that's having a pretty good season. The Edmonton Oil Kings are 23 games above 500. How important is this game Friday night to the Pats' playoff hopes?
Well, I think every game the rest of the season is incredibly important for the Regina Pats, and there's only about, say, 6 weeks or so left in the 2025-26 season. Yeah, this game is huge. And not just because of where they are in the standings, but they've actually played very well against the Edmonton Oil Kings this year. In fact, they're 2-1 against Edmonton with 2 one-goal victories in the last 2 games, both at Rogers Place in Edmonton, and their only loss was back in October, and they also lost 3-2. So, yeah, this weekend is crucial for the Regina Pats. They're 2 points up on Moose Jaw, 1 point up on Red Deer, 7th in the Eastern Conference standings. You know, Moose Jaw's not necessarily playing their best as of late. Red Deer's been, up and down. They're playing still good hockey, obviously still in the playoff spot. And Regina's won 4 straight games. And tomorrow, Penticton comes into town. That's a little bit of an unknown. They're the oldest team of the WHL, so we'll see what brings this weekend.
Still a lot of hockey to be played, and it's great to get a victory, but there's nothing better than beating someone who's really high up there in the standings like Edmonton is. When I look at the standings, if the playoffs were to start today, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it would be a 2 versus 7 matchup where the Pats would face Medicine Hat. So I'll just ask the question, how would the Pats match up against Medicine Hat?
Well, the Pats have only played the Medicine Hat Tigers once this year, so that means they'll play them 3 more times before the end of the season. So I guess we're going to have to wait and see. They are a little bit banged up. No Pickford, no Wu as of late, but they did receive Andrew Basham from the Calgary Flames at the WHL trade deadline. So how they match up, it's tough to say because the last time the Pats played the Tigers, believe it or not, was September 27th. They haven't played them since. And both teams have changed drastically. I mean, Medicine Hat has added. Regina has, I guess, for lack of a better term, subtracted with Julie Mays not with the team, but Maddox Schultz and Liam Pugh are better. That's an interesting question. I don't know if I have the answer, Brennan.
That's kind of the great thing about the sport, isn't it? Like, teams just change so much at the start of the season. We talk about that with the CFL, but it's especially true in your league. There's just so many moving parts, and if you haven't seen anybody since late September, early October, it's kind of a box of chocolates. You don't know what you're going to get, even if it's a 2 versus 7 matchup.
100%. You're 100% right about that. And Medicine Hat went on a 17-game winning streak or whatever it was. And, they're a really good team. And, hey, it might not be the Medicine Hat Tigers. It might be the Prince Albert Raiders. I don't know. I mean, Prince Albert seems to be kind of running away with the Eastern Conference right now, but Medicine Hat still could potentially catch them. Edmonton's probably saying the same thing right now. They would love to say that they want to catch the Medicine Hat Tigers and only 5 points back of the Tigers coming into today's game. So time will tell. As I mentioned, Medicine Hat's a little bit banged up, but they're a fast team. In order for Regina, say in a first-round playoff matchup, to have success, maybe take Medicine Hat to the distance or maybe even upset them, they're going to have to play really good defensive hockey. And they're probably going to have to rely on their goaltender, Merrick Schlenker. Their older players are going to have to be their older players. They are going to have to try to avoid cheating, turning over pucks at the blue lines, good to have a good defensive system, manage pucks efficiently. Yeah, just all the cliches, because Medicine Hat is a team that really can score off the rush, and they're so fast that Pats D are going to have to be really important against them. And, hey, maybe Regina plays Edmonton in round 1 if they make it. Maybe it's PA, maybe it's Medicine Hat. Time will tell.
You mentioned Merrick Schlenker, and I'm old enough to remember covering the Pats when his dad, Chris Schlenker, played on the blue line. And so he'll be at the game tonight. And who are some other names aside from him and Liam Pugh and Maddox Schultz? I feel like we hear those names a lot. Who are some other players who have really been stepping up for the Pats?
Well, I know these are maybe not guys that fans, when they look at the score sheet at the end of the night and see their names pop out there, but I've really been impressed with Zach Moore, Jace Eglin, Dave Sturkach. That line has been very good, and it actually came since Brad Haroff decided to move Dave Sturkach to the wing and put Zach Moore in the middle and Jace Eglin on the right, and what's allowed him to throw that combination out there with a lot of home games in the recent month has been obviously Maddox, Schultz, and Liam Pugh in the lineup more times than not. Being able to put that shutdown line out there, that's provided energy for the team. In fact, they're always the starting line at the beginning of every single period. They're taking on tough defensive matchups against the other team's top line. So that way Brad at home can match up maybe his top line, Caden Brown and Fawcett, etc., with maybe the other team's second or third line. And then he kind of throws out the Moore, Eglin, and Derkach line out there to try to shut down the other team's top players. On the road, it's maybe a little bit different because, the home team has last change. But on home ice, the Pats are able to kind of run with that a little bit, and we're going to see that line out there tonight. Been really impressed with those three players, how they play away from the puck. Jace Eglin's just amazing as far as his will to compete. He blocks shots all the time. Really like their play. Another guy that doesn't get on the score sheet a lot, but I think it has a really bright future in the WHL and with the Pats is Mathis Paul. He's a 6'3.5", 6'4" power forward that is really coming into his own as of late. He finishes his checks all the time. He actually moves his feet quite well. He's got a pretty good shot, good playmaking ability, good hockey sense. His compete level is very high. He's somebody that I think fans are going to really enjoy watching in the next 2 or 3 years. He's only 16, so that's maybe why I don't think we talk about him too much, because he's not really somebody that the team kind of relies upon as far as contributing offensively, but he is an important player on the fourth line. So, yeah, I think those are the guys that maybe don't get enough love, but like Caden Brown, Keats Fawcett, Effer McNutt, those three players, your older players, have been the Pats' best players. So when you look at the score sheet every single night and you see those guys, you obviously expect that.
When I had asked earlier or mentioned the 15-year-old rookies, Pugh and Schultz, and I've often wondered, what should we expect? Because we're out of the good old days where if you were at that age, you could play as many as 5 games and that was that, and then maybe join on the playoff run. And it's different now where they're here for half the season. My original expectation was that we were going to see a lot of up and down. There were probably going to be days where they looked like world beaters, getting 4 or 5 points, and then they would go through strings of 3-4 games where they looked almost invisible. And you just see that when you see someone who's underage, who's for lack of a better term, phenom status. What have we been seeing from them? Have you been seeing that up and down as well, or has it been more consistent than that?
I'd say since the Christmas break, we've seen it more consistent. In fact, Maddox Schultz has 11 points in his last 11 games, and Liam Pugh's got 5 points in his last 6 games. I think since the Christmas break, those players have really kind of fit in seamlessly. I felt like there was a lot of up and downs in the first half of the season, and that's with limited action, to be quite honest with you, Brendan. It's not like they were playing, all 30-plus games in the first half of the season. They'd only played half of them. It took Maddox Schultz 10 games to score his first WHL goal. It actually came just before the Christmas break in December. Since then, he's got 8 goals. He's been really good. I really feel like he's fit in. If you don't have a roster sheet in front of you and you see number 19 skating around, you might think he's 18 or 19 years old. And the same goes for Liam Pugh. Their confidence is higher. Their understanding how to play at this level. And, I was reading an interesting article by Taylor Shire in the Leader Post today where he talked about, Maddox, and I was reading some of his quotes, and he mentioned, and I'm paraphrasing right now, but he mentioned on the lines of, being with the team a little bit more in the second half and practicing more with the team. For example, he's only played 1 game in the month of February with the Pac Canadians, and that was on February 3rd. He hasn't been in the lineup since, and the same goes for Liam Pugh. They're really focusing on playing with the Regina Pats right now, and they're here with the team full time. They're not jumping back and forth like they did, say, earlier on in the season. And I think that's really benefited those players because, A, they're playing better. They understand how to play at this level. They're not, turning pucks over in bad spots. They're not forcing on-man rushes. They're understanding how to manage the puck. They're understanding, how to play with their teammates. And, they're just so smart. They're such good players. So to answer your original question, yes, I saw ups and downs at the start of the season, a lot of lows, but I haven't really seen a lot of ups and downs in the last, 10 or so games that they've played. It really seems like they belong in this league right now.
Is there a challenge in having your identity as your 2 best players are a couple of underagers?
I mean, I guess people have to ask themselves, what do you mean by best players? Are they the most skilled players on the ice? Do they have the highest ceiling? Yes, but the top performers every single night and the best players is Caden Brown, Keith Fawcett, and Efren McNutt. Those have to be your best players because they're your 19 and 20-year-olds. Can't rely on your 15-year-old players to carry their team. Now, can they complement the team? Yes, but at the end of the day, Fawcett, Brown, McNutt, etc., have to be Bridgman. They have to be the team's best players. They have to be their leaders. So yes, when you look at the Pats roster and you look at their team, you go, okay, Matty Schultz and Liam Pugh are the two players that have the highest ceiling, the most skilled players. They make the most amazing plays. They shoot the puck the best. But as far as their overall game, I would say the older players are just a little bit ahead of them because they've played 200-plus games in the Western Hockey League. Matty Schultz and Liam Pugh have played just over 20.
That's a good point. And I guess I was thinking about the great story of Jeff Friesen putting the team on his back at age 16 in that 93 playoff run and dragging them all the way to the conference final. And what a heavy load that was for a young player. Sounds like we're not in that situation, at least not yet,
No.
with these two youngsters. I know that Regina has become more and more of a football community in the last 20 years, in the time that I've been in this town. But we're still more of a hockey province, I believe. And the Pats and just the sport really has its most interest, whether it's at the WHL level or at the SJHL level, when we get after Christmas. So here in February, in prime time hockey season, when there isn't a lot else going on out there, is it more fun being around the rink? Are you seeing bigger crowds?
I am seeing bigger crowds, and we're expected to have some really big crowds this weekend. And I think what's going to add to the atmosphere this weekend is that it's family weekend. So all parents, billets, siblings, etc., are here inside the Brand Center. In fact, as we're doing this interview right now, there's a little bit of a reception for all the billet families and parents down in the Pats VIP room just behind the Zamboni entrance. And, you know, when I was just walking out of that room, Dale Durkach was giving a speech and thanking all the billets and thanking all the parents for their time and allowing, you know, the Pats to take care of their kids throughout the season. We're going to have a special ceremony where we're going to honor all the moms and billet moms before today's game, and then we're expected to have all the dads on the bench for warm-up as well in tomorrow's game. So it's a busy weekend for the organization. There's a lot of moving parts going on for everybody involved, and they're just trying to, you know, pull off a really good experience for the fans, but also for the families involved as well, because it's a special time for all the families and parents to get together and to get to know each other, and for the players to be around their families, especially for those that don't have their family within the province and don't get to see them a whole lot. So I think it's going to be a fun weekend. I think we're seeing a lot of really good crowds. Crowds are increasing with the team obviously playing some pretty good hockey as of late. They just need to find a way to continue to, you know, stay on that trend. The schedule's not going to get any easier. They've got some tough teams coming up. You look at Penticton tomorrow; they're second in the Western Conference standings, and then you have the Edmonton Oil Kings tonight, who are a very good team. And, you know, coming up, there's no more Swift Currents. They do play Lethbridge a couple of more times, so that's, you know, two games that the Pats need to find a way to win. So time will tell, but I think, you know, from talking to the guys in the interviews that I've done, they mentioned that they appreciate the energy that the crowd was giving them on Monday in that 7-6 shootout win over Swift Current. And without the fans, I don't think that the Pats would have won that game, because everybody was into it. They were booing the refs. They were on their feet. And it just felt like, you know, the whole city was kind of behind them in that game. And it was a really cool experience for the players. And I think they really wanted to win that game for the fans, and that's what happened.
Did you get to go out to Penticton on the West Coast swing, or did you guys go through the States this year?
We went through the States this year. Unfortunately, it wasn't a very good road trip, 0-6. Next year, the team will be going to BC.
What's it been like having Penticton in the WHL? I was curious to see how that would all work.
They're really good, man. They actually just recently set the record for most wins by an expansion franchise in their inaugural season. They've got 36 wins. They've only lost 13 games in regulation. More than half of their roster is undrafted. These are all American kids that they were able to recruit from Minnesota. I think I counted 8 Minnesota kids on their roster. Guys from the US NDP program, former BCHL stars, guys that, did well in the USHL that have come over. They're the oldest team in the WHL. They have 15 19-year-olds on their team, 15, and 4 20-year-olds because the league granted 4 20-year-olds for them because of their first season, and they've obviously taken advantage of that. It's not even close. So think about it. Every time they dress their lineup, they've got all 19 and 20-year-olds in their lineup. Well, that's going to change next year, is allowing them only to carry 3 20-year-olds, but they're still going to carry a lot of 19-year-old players. That's why they've had a lot of success. I give Fred Harbinson a lot of credit. He's gone a different pathway as far as drafting and developing. He's essentially just gone out and recruited players like they did in Junior A. The question remains to be seen on how long will this last, but kudos to them. They've done a great job in their first season. That program has always won at every level.
When I covered the SJ, I often thought the fact they used older players really worked to their advantage to, just making a better product. And I guess Penticton's been trying to follow that too. And sorry, very quickly, because I know I've got to run. Have you ever walked out of any of these arenas and the autograph seekers thought you were one of the players and asked you for your autograph? Has that happened yet?
Me?
Yeah.
Like me?
Yeah.
No.
Yes, no. You.
No. Not me.
Next time we're at the rink, I'll ask you for your autograph. And then you can say that it's happened. So, hey, listen, enjoy the game tonight. I'll be at the game. In my day job, I'm entertaining like 20 clients. And so
good for you.
There's lots of buzz around the rink tonight, and I'm excited to come down there. I'll pop in and say hi when I get a chance.
All right. See you here, buddy. See ya.
All right, that is the voice of the Regina Pats, Dante De Caria. Pregame show here on 620 CKRM at 6:30. Puck drop just after 7. Taking on the Edmonton Oil Kings, who are pretty good, and this would be a huge victory for the Pats, not just in their chances to get into the postseason, but even just morale-wise. You beat one of the top teams in the conference. That would make them feel a lot better about not just their chances of getting in the playoffs, but competing in the playoffs as well. Okay, we better take a break. You are watching and listening to the Sports Cage at sportscage.com and on 620 CKRM. Steelcraft Doors, that song, it's always stuck in my mind. I don't want to completely butcher it. Canada beats the Finns 3-2 in Olympic semifinal action today. Boy, was that a scare. The Finns led the game 2-1 for really most of the third period before Shea Theodore tied it up with just over 9 minutes to go. And then Nathan McKinnon on a bit of a controversial goal gets the game winner with 32 seconds remaining. Canada badly outshot the Finns in that game. At any rate, Canada's moving on to face the Americans in the gold medal game. That'll be a 7:10 a.m. Saskatchewan time start on Sunday morning. The Americans absolutely rolling over the Slovakians, and so Canada will be more battle tested, but had to fight a little harder to get to that gold medal game than the Americans did. The Canadian women's curling team will not win gold. Instead, Rachel Homan's rink will have to try and settle for bronze. They lost this morning to Sweden 6-3. That's the second time they played the Swedes. They won the first, lost this one. They will face Team USA tomorrow morning at 7:05 Saskatchewan time to see if we can add to that medal total in that bronze medal game. Meanwhile, the men's team will play for gold at 12 noon Saturday versus Great Britain. Canada did add another medal to its total as Brendan McGuire added a bronze in men's freestyle skiing halfpipe. So as we double check the standings, Canada in the 11th spot with 17 medals, and Norway leading the way with 37. United States with only 29, a ways back for number 2. Elsewhere, other things to talk about. Lots happening in the WHL. Of course, the Regina Pats game will be on 620 CKRM tonight from the Brandt Center. Pre-game show at 6:30. Dante De Caria with the call at 7 o'clock. Prince Albert Raiders visiting Moose Jaw. Prince George is in Swift Current, and the Saskatoon Blades travel to Alberta to face the Red Deer Rebels. Also, half dozen games around the SJHL. Humboldt visits the Yorkton Terriers. Estevan Bruins are in Nipawin. Melville Millionaires travel to Flin Flon. Battlefords will host the Warman Wolverines. Larange at Melfort, and Kindersley entertains Weyburn. As well, I should mention Saskatchewan Midget AAA Boys action tonight. Tisdale Trojans visit the Estevan Bears. Battleford North Stars are in Saskatoon to face the Blazers. And on the female side, Saskatoon Stars at Battlefords to play the Sharks. And the Prince Albert Bears will visit the Notre Dame Hounds. That is the sports ticker for Steelcraft Doors Regina, made in Western Canada for Western Canada. Brendan McGuire and Colson Schultz on this Friday edition of the program. The text line brought to you by Prairie Land Rentals and Sales since 1986. For big or small jobs, stop in and deal with the owner. 600 Albert Street. Snow blowers, skid steers, power sources, moving equipment. You know, we didn't really get time to discuss this with Eric Francis, and for good reason. I mean, given what's happening today, the focus is on the Olympics and the game that happened and both games that happened. But I wanted to talk to him a little bit about my Canucks. I see these reels on my social media feed, as a lot of our listeners do. And there's one on some podcast where Matthew Barnaby was talking about watching the Canucks play a little while ago. And he said, he didn't use this language. It's language I can't use on radio. But he said, what an awful team that is. And I'm hearing that everywhere, that they're just so bad to watch. They don't compete. They don't fight hard. And it makes me wonder where the Canucks are headed to from here. It seemed like when Jimmy Rutherford took over the reins, he really put his foot down and he put his stamp on them early. When he went out, he got Bruce Boudreau. The team was looking better. And then in the offseason, he wouldn't give him a long-term extension. He'd only offer him a one-year deal. And that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, including many in the fan base and Bruce Boudreau. And it was a real gamble at that point, because if Bruce says, no, I'm not going to take your lowball offer, that would have made Jimmy Rutherford look really bad, especially if the team didn't do well. But he stuck to his guns. He said, you have a track record of coming in, turning things around immediately, and it never lasts. And so I'm not going to give you that long-term extension because I don't know that you can do this long-term. I don't know that I can trust you to have sustained success. So why would I give you a multi-year contract? And eventually, Bruce signed on the dotted line for that one-year extension. And wouldn't you know it, the following year, by mid-season, the team was struggling again. So just as Jimmy Rutherford had suspected, this was not a long-term fix. So there was considerable embarrassment when it leaked out to the press that they had already lined up Rick Tocchet to come in and take over before they fired Bruce. Everybody knew that Bruce's last game would be the Saturday night, and Jimmy Rutherford took a huge black eye over that. But then Rick Tocchet took over, and wouldn't you know it, the team played better. He had them playing better systematically, and what I've heard from players is that Rick Tocchet is one of the best teachers out there. And this goes back to his time as an assistant coach with the Tampa Bay Lightning. They had a rookie named Steven Stamkos, and Barry Melrose was the head coach. He didn't think that Stamkos should be playing at the NHL level. He said he should be in junior. He got fired 16 games in. Tocchet takes over. And a lot of the talking heads on TSN, including at the time John Tortorella, said Stamkos is playing better because you can see there's some actual teaching going on. And I've heard rave reviews from players of all situations over what a great coach Tocchet is. And Tocchet has actually walked the talk. He's played at that level, and he's done it at a high level, and he did it as a grinder. And his credibility at an elite level, in my view, is unimpeachable when you consider the elite players he's played with in international play and at the NHL level, and the gritty way he's had to go about it while still playing a skilled game. He could score too. And so in Vancouver, he did a masterful job. He got them into contender status, where they had that great series in the second round against Edmonton in the 24 season. And then in the next year, they had a problem with their two best players, where one had to be traded, the other needed a leave of absence. The team went downhill, and then at the end of the year, Toc decided he didn't want to come back. So they hire Adam Foote, and it seems like they've been a mess ever since. And I'm not saying it's Adam Foote's fault. A lot of people are blaming it on management, Jim Rutherford, saying that this team is constructed very poorly. But I'm not quite ready to go down that road, because if there's anything we've learned from the time that Jim Rutherford and Patrick Alvin have been running the Vancouver Canucks, it's been very up and down, really quick. Like, they could be great, and then 2 years later, they're awful. And then they could be great again in another 2 years. And I think you take some of that up and down and just accept it as part of the ebb and flow of the National Hockey League and the way it is today. apparently the fan base wants to go back to the retro skate logo that they enjoyed in the 1980s and 90s. And the owner has acknowledged as such, but he says he doesn't like that logo. So for half the games, they use the old retro, and the other half of the games, they use that really ugly whale, which to me has never been a fit for the Canucks. The only reason they had that whale was because Orca Bay acquired the team in the mid-90s. But Orca Bay is an American-based company. They have no connection to Vancouver whatsoever. The only connection you could say from that silly whale logo is that Vancouver does have an aquarium, but it really doesn't fit the mold of the Canucks. And to me, I felt like their identity was a little lacking when they stayed away from going back to the skate logo, because logos do matter, despite what some will say. I think the Canucks need to go back to their skate logo, just like I felt like the Winnipeg Jets needed to go back to their more 80s look. But then I realized in the times we're in, it's kind of fitting that they have the Royal Canadian Air Force logo, and we're talking about Canada defending its own sovereignty. It's almost more fitting that they stick with the logo they have right now. But it would still be cool to see them go back to what they had. What can I say? Logos were just better in the 1980s and 90s than they are today. We're going to take one more break. And no, we won't take. We'll stay right here. And also, I wanted to point out the reason why I have this obsession with the Paul Woods project, the Canadian Football Time Machine, is it really explains how the Canadian Football League became really, really strong in their glory days, and then why they have deteriorated as far as in competition directly with the National Football League, or even in competition with other leagues like the NHL. And I think that's important to understand, because if you're going to solve those issues, you have to understand what the root cause is. And in our visit with Paul Woods early on, he made some really interesting points that it wasn't as simple as the Toronto Blue Jays playing really well in that era, or the fact that more and more Canadians were able to look at cable television and see that there was another league out there, the National Football League, that there was a better league overall. He tied it to the rise of the USFL and how that raised salaries for players in general, and it put upward pressure on the National Football League to raise their salaries, which created this real separation between the NFL and the CFL. So sometimes I wonder if we miss out on talent in our league today that we should have and we could have if we had the same salary level as the early 1980s. And I'll give you an example. Willard Reeves was making $160,000 a year to be the running back of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Now, we have running backs making more money than that today, but the problem is $160,000 doesn't go as far today as it did in the mid-1980s, 40 years ago. And when I ran the inflation calculator on Google, Willard Reeves' salary was somewhere around $435 or maybe even a little bit higher in today's dollars. And we just cannot pay our elite athletes that kind of money. And it makes you wonder if there are running backs and star players who today should be in our league but decide they just don't want to play pro ball anymore because they can go do something else. And it's just not worth the money that we can give them. But the more I think about it, on the flip side of it all, I would still argue that we're in pretty good shape as far as the talent goes, because we see lots of players still competing for NFL jobs, which these are largely players the NFL either wants or at least interested in. And the fact that the NFL pays such an insane amount to all of their players, it makes more players chase that dream, which in turn, I think, leads to more athletes coming and joining the pipeline and finding a home up here in Canada. So long and the short of it is, the talent in our league is as good as it's ever been. And I actually think that the Canadian Football League has a much more bright future than sometimes we are led to believe. Well, that'll do it. That's our Friday edition of the program. I want to thank everybody who helped us put this together, especially Colson Schultz, who basically did all the work so that I just get to sit here and talk and look nice on camera. Special thanks to Dante De Caria, Eric Francis, Farhan Lalji, and Paul Woods. And to you, the listener, for tuning in. If you weren't listening there, we couldn't be here. Good night, everybody.